Hello, lovely human beings. How is everyone? I hope everyone is okay, because I clearly cannot see you or hear you at this point. I'm gonna do a live when I'll have subscribers, but at this point it's just me and the camera, and maybe the future you who looks at my cringy videos from the past. So today we are going to be building a brand new Blazor Server application that will help us manage our recipes. So yeah, a RecipeManager class, because who doesn't want more recipe applications? Cool, we are going to be doing that using Blazor Server and a bunch of packages, and actually just a framework called Entity Framework, and that implies us using a couple of packages called Entity Framework Core SQL Server and Entity Framework Core Tools. Yes, as well as those ones, we'll add a new one called system.net.http.json, because we want that to be able to deserialize our HTTP responses from the server. Okay, cool. So that's just a brief overview and the quick steps that we are going to cover as part of this video, because obviously I can't do all the tutorial as part of this video because it will become boring to you and tiring for me. So I'm just gonna split it up in nice little chunks of 20 to 25 minutes. We'll see how this goes. As part of this video, all we'll do is Step 1, set up a new Blazor Server app. Step 2, add a class library to hold our database and our entities definitions, and by entities I mean tables. Then we'll set up a connection string as part of the appsettings.config, and then we'll add a couple of folders in the DataAccess project that will hold our data and our data models. I'll get to that when I'll explain in the video when I'll get to that step. And then, like I said, we'll install a bunch of dependencies. One being Entity Framework Core SQL Server. That's going to help us manage our database, our SQL Server database, and then Entity Framework Core Tools. And this has got a bunch of really nice and juicy functions, methods that we can use that are exposed, and we can use to create our migrations, to update them to the database. And you'll see it's really nice. We don't even have to create a database. Entity Framework Core will create that for us. And then we'll set up the ApplicationDbContext, and when we'll hook that up with our connection string, with our database, so that we can use an entity framework commands across the application later on in the following video. Then we'll set up a HTTP client and ApplicationDbContext as part of the startup class, and then we'll create a recipe model, a recipe entity, and by entity, again, I mean table. So that recipe entity will help store our recipes, because we want them to be stored somewhere. We don't want to refresh the page and then all of our really good progress to go away. So it'll have a title, it'll have a description, it will have a date created, because obviously we want to know when that's been created, and a date updated, because we don't want a recipe from 1970s or 2001 that's outdated. We want something maybe vintage, but with a futuristic twist. So you'll see what I mean when it comes to that. So yes, that's pretty much it with the entity. And then last but not least, we will be using Entity Framework Core Tools to create our very first migration, our initial migration. Then lastly, we'll obviously run that migration, so update, and we'll have Entity Framework Core, EF Core create our database for us, as well as the recipe entity. So without further ado, no one wants further ado, let's get started with a video. Right, so open up Visual Studio 2019 and then create new project. Then, if you haven't already got Blazor Server app in the recent project templates, you can go ahead and search for it in the search bar. So say Blazor Server. So it should be in your list. And then call it RecipeManager. That's just what I'm gonna call it. You can call it whatever you wish. Okay. In here, I'm going to be leaving this as .NET Core 3.1 and then the authentication type to none. We won't be focusing on authentication as part of this tutorial, so just click Create. Okay, so we're here. I'm just going to collapse this for the time being. And yes, that is pretty much it. Let's run this in the browser and see how it looks. Basically, it's just a stub Blazor Server web application. Okay, so this is it. We've got the counter, click me, and the fetch data, and we're going to be doing something very similar to this one, but I've already showed you. It's just going to be a very, very simple bootstrap table. So I'm just going to close this out because we won't need it. Okay, so step number 2, we're going to be adding a class library. So that is a type of project that can hold many types of files, but in this case, it will hold the database. So if we right-click on the Solution Explorer and add New Project, and then we choose from the list, we choose Class Library. Again, if you cannot see it, just search for it. You should have it. There. And then we can call it DataAccess. And then click Next. The target framework should be the same, so I'm not going to change that. Okay, and we're here. We won't be needing this test class. Then the next thing that we want to do, so step 3, is setting up appsettings.json inside the RecipeManager project. So I'm just going to quickly be opening up. So in here, instead of, say, hard coding the database connection string within the project, I'm just going to put it in the appsettings.json so that later on, we won't be doing this, but in real life, when it comes to the app settings file, these properties will get overwritten by your release pipelines, so that you can release on different environments, and then this connection string will be changed to whatever the connection string of the environment will be. So I'm just adding a connection strings property in here, and then here we will do default connection, and then we'll set this server equals to dot means localhost, and then database, and then you can name this whatever you want. Just make sure that you reference the name of your database here, and we haven't created it yet, so don't worry, just give it a name. I'm just going to give it a name of RecipeManager, and then trusted connection equals to true. Okay, so if you do not know your default connection, then one way you can find it out is by expanding the SQL Server Object Explorer on the left-hand side of your IDE. However, if you cannot see it, then go onto the search bar and search for SQL Server Object Explorer, and you should be able to see this. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly disconnect from these ones, and then leave only the connection, leave only the server that's got my laptop name on it. That being IOPC, IO standing for Julian Awana. Yours is most probably going to differ. So right-click on your server, and then click on Properties, and then on the right-hand side, or whatever yours is docked, you will see a set of properties. Now, I'm not sure, there should definitely be a whole bunch of properties here. However, that's not important. The only thing that's important is the connection string for us. And then if you double click on this one, you can, as easy as going in here and pasting that in there. So that's it. That's one way of doing this, but we won't be needing a lot of this noise. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Or at least that's what Microsoft recommends. So I'm just going to go with that. Right, okay. And then step 4, we will be adding a couple of files in our DataAccess project because we want to keep everything nice and clean. So the first folder that we're going to be adding is called data. And then the second one is called models. And the data will store our application DB context. And then the models will hold our entities or our tables. And in this case, there will be a recipe table that we're going to be creating. So that's what models is going to hold. Okay, in here in data, we're going to go ahead and add a new class. And this is called ApplicationDbContext. Cool. Before doing anything in this class, we need to install a few dependencies, and those dependencies are Entity Framework Core SQL Server and the Entity Framework Core Entity Framework Core tools. So let's open up our favorite browser and go on the NuGet.org. So we're just going to go ahead and copy this. Alternatively, what we could do is install this through the command line. However, I'm not going to do that because this is much faster for the purpose of our tutorial. That is really up to you. All you need to do is cd in your project directory. If you want to do it this way, cd in your project directory, so change directory in your inside your project, and then run that command. If not, then you can you can open up Package Manager console and do it that way. Actually, let's just do it that way. And then I'm going to show you how you could do it through the NuGet Manager inside the Visual Studio as well. So copy this, choose your default project. So in this case, I'll be choosing DataAccess. Actually, I'm going to install Entity Framework in both DataAccess and the RecipeManager. Okay, so paste that in there, press enter, and it should go ahead and install it. Okay, then the next one in the same project will be Microsoft Entity Framework Core Tools. So copy, paste that in here, installing successfully executed. Then I'm going to switch over to the RecipeManager and install the same dependencies because we will need them in the RecipeManager as well. Okay, and then Entity Framework Core Tools, and we're good to go. Yes. Now, still under step 4, what we need to do is we are now free to add a constructor to the ApplicationDbContext class. So to add a constructor, all you need to do is type in CTOR, and then double tab. And then in here, I'm going to do DB context options. And then it's going to underline it with red, meaning that it can't recognize that. So I'm just going to press Control dot. And then it will prompt me to add a using to the to import Microsoft Entity Framework Core. And that's what I am doing. And then type application DB context. And this is options. And then I'm also instantiating the base options. Okay, and this is going to be underlined with red because it can't find a base class, and this will inherit from DB context. Okay, so far so good. So that's pretty much it with this constructor. So now onto the step 5, which is to install dependencies. However, we have already done that. The only dependency that we haven't installed in the RecipeManager project is system.net.htp.json. So let's quickly do that as well, so we can get rid of it. This will help us handle JSON data later in the tutorial series. So we won't be needing that now, but it's good to just get it out of the way. Okay, next step is step number 7, step number 6 was application DB context. Again, if I mess these steps up, don't worry. I will annotate them on the screen so you can follow along without me needing to say the step number. Okay, so the next step is set up the startup class. And in here, we need to add a couple of lines to add HTTP client as a configured service, as well as to add the DB context. So let's just do that real quick. Services.add HTTP client. That's it. So now we can use the HTTP client on our backend all over the application inside the RecipeManager. And then services.add DB context of type application DB context. And this will have us to import EF core. Of course, we can add a reference to the options, use SQL Server, and now we can add the EF core reference. Okay, and in here we can do configuration dot get connection string, and then we give the name of the connection string default connection. So it is really, really, really important that you actually type this in correctly. Otherwise, it won't be able to find it, and your app won't run correctly. So when it comes to adding your migrations and actually running them, your app will fail because, and most probably because your default app connection is not correct. Right, so this line, like I said, this adds the HTTP client service and it exposes the HTTP client service class across the recipe model project. And then this one adds the DB context that we've just created. So if I F12 this, this will take us to the class that we've just created. So it initializes it and exposes it throughout the project. And then this options gets defined with the use SQL Server method, and instead of, so this expects a string of type a connection string of type string, and we could have just easily gone in and say type in this, so that it uses a hard-coded connection string. However, we're going to leave this as it is because, like I said, it is good practice to have your connection strings inside the appsettings.json. Okay, so step 8, create the recipe model in the models folder. So we're going to go ahead and add a new class and then call it recipe. So this is important to keep it singular because you will see that we will pluralize it when we reference it in the application DB context. So in here, we can add a bunch of properties. So, and keep in mind that this class, this recipe class, is going to be referenced across the project, and this is going to be our entity, our table that will store actual recipes. So if we type in prop and then double tab, here we've got a nice little snippet generated by Visual Studio, and the first property that we're going to add is an ID, an identifier. Every entity needs a unique identifier to that particular table. And then the next one is the title. And then the following one is, maybe we want a description. And then why not a start date? Sorry, not a start date, but a creation date, so we know when that recipe has been created. So that's going to be of type date time. Or actually, better yet, date created. And then the following one, still a date time, and then maybe a date updated. So we know when was the last time that recipe was updated. We don't want to cook recipes from 1970s. Or we do, but maybe we want something that's been recently updated with a nice little futuristic twist. Right, then to step 9. And this step is really important because we will be adding our migrations as well as running them against our database. So our database that we've specified in here will be created on this server with the entities that we've created here. So before doing anything, actually, we need to reference this recipe class to the ApplicationDbContext. And to do that, we can add, not a property, but more of a public db set of type recipe. And then we can import that models folder, namespace, call it recipes. So see, this is where we pluralize it because a db set is like some sort of a collection, right? This means that we've got more than one recipe across across our context. Right. So, and that's gonna be, actually it's a property. So set. Okay, get and set. Cool. We're good to go. So now what we need to do is go in the package manager console, and if you cannot see it, then search for it in the search bar. You should be able to find it. Package manager console. Cool, and that is there. So the first thing that we want to do as part of step 9 is to add the migration, the initial migration. So to do that, we need to type in add migration initial create. So this is where the entity framework core tools package comes in handy, because I forgot to mention actually what these are good for. So this is meant to help provide this provides a set of functions that you can use to make your life easier managing the database. So add migration, drop database, get DB context, get migration, remove migration, scaffold, script migration, update database. We're going to be using add migration and update database as part of this project. And then entity framework core SQL Server is actually what manages our SQL Server database. So if you did everything correctly, oh, by the way, really important, the default project needs to be set to DataAccess in this case, because that is where our migrations will be ran against and will be stored as well as part of that project. You will see that this will have a brand new folder called migrations, and in it will sit our brand new migration. Okay, one thing to note before we add migration is the fact that if I refresh my databases folder, I don't have any RecipeManager database created. And that is really important because that database will actually be generated by entity framework for us on the server specified in the connection strings. So if I press enter on the add migration initial create, the initial create is just a name. You can call that whatever you want, but it's good to keep that name representative of the purpose of the script. Okay, so that has been added. So if I get this out the way for a second. Right, so this is it. It's got a couple of methods. So if I collapse the definition, it's got an up and the down method, the migration. And if I expand this, there is so much information to know. There is so much to know in entity framework. However, for us, all we need to care about is the fact that it just creates a table, and the name of the table is recipes, and then it's got the tables with the data types, right? So that's all we need to worry about, that all our columns have been added successfully. So all that we have specified in the recipe class is now translated by entity framework in in C# for SQL Server to for it to then later create a SQL file to be executed against our database. And that's what we're going to be doing now. Oh, and also it's added a constraint of primary key. And then in here, it just drops the table in the down in case you want to remove the migration. Okay, so the next sub-step is to update database. So that's it. Press enter. And now what it will do, it will grab this migration and run it against the database. If there isn't a database already created, then it will create a database. So this is done. So if I expand this and refresh the databases folder, here we go. We've got a RecipeManager database. And then if we expand this, we'll have our brand new tables as soon as it loads. We've got our brand new tables. This is created automatically by Entity Framework, and it stores the migrations. And then this one is the recipes entity. So this is what we will be using. Okay, so I think that is pretty much it for today's video. It's been a little over 20 minutes as far as I can see. Yes. So just to recap really quick, what we've done as part of this video is created a brand new Blazor Server application, then created a class library to hold our database context, then set up the appsettings.json, then installed a bunch of packages, which is just 3 packages in 2 different projects. Then we've set up the ApplicationDbContext, and we've set up the startup class with these 2 little lines here to allow us to use HTTP client and our DB context across the project. Then we've set up a recipe entity to store our recipes in a future video, and also we have generated our very first initial migration using Entity Framework Core and Entity Framework Core tools to be specific, as well as updated that migration, ran it against our server. So if you did like this video, make sure you give a thumbs up and subscribe if you like content like this one. And yeah, until next time, stay safe.